get yourself together before it's too late. Well, the music seems apropos. After that shit show of a week. Whoa. Off to an auspicious start. Good evening, everybody. It's Divided We Stand. A show with about tops of 20 guests. But it's good to see everybody, really. Let me turn this background music down. Yeah. It's 9:06 Eastern Standard Time, right? Saturday night, the 7th of January, and the show goes on. Again, this is Divided We Stand. Divided We Stand on YouTube, Divided We Stand on Facebook. Twitter, you can find me on Twitter, and the show is broadcast there too. So we have 3 different platforms and about 20 views. But that's okay. That's okay. Let's see who's in the chat room. We got Veg. Veg, I saw your very, very funny video today. Balls and arrows. That was good. Play on words there. Lisa's here. Trev is here. Kim's here. Karen's here. Joey's here. Mooney Real is here. Midas Lisa. Kinky's here. And there's a few other people, I'm sure, who are here, but they're not in the chat room. But that's okay. It's your choice. This is the channel where you can commiserate or just simply chill out or ventilate. It's been more like ventilating of late than anything else. No new news on the day front. Haven't had anything come my way since last speaking with you. So we're in a position now we just have to wait and see. It'll be great to have Dave back because a lot of nonsense went on this week. And not just what we saw in Congress. There were other things too, and I want to bring that up. Because this is never ending. And this just is what life is in this country. We either accept it or we don't. I don't agree with what's going on, but I just have to live with it, I suppose. Right. So, I'm sure some of you saw the shit show, and I know half of the crowd out there is from Canada, but you, and I mean this seriously, you're all very, very informed, so I'm sure you've seen the videos from last night. I think it was on the 15th or the 16th vote. The asshole finally got confirmed as House Speaker. It was good while it lasted, right? You wanted to see them argue with each other. But there were some highlights to it that I think were worth showing, and that would be, of course, Hakeem Jeffries, who, in his very short speech, went through the alphabet, A to Z, and compared Democrats to Republicans. And this, I think, is very, very important because there is a belief out there, as we've talked about many, many times, that there are people who think that both parties are exactly the same. And that somehow there's some kind of media conspiracy that this is all played out to fool us. And that can be no further than the truth. It's just not true. Now, that's not to throw bouquets at the Democratic Party, but I do have to throw darts at the Republicans. And again, this was best expressed in Hakeem Jeffries' speech last night, which I will show you. A few other things I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you our good old buddy Kyle Rittenhouse. He's at it again. And, I was speaking in the kitchen tonight with Ronnie about Kyle Rittenhouse, because, of course, we both hate him, and I'm sure you out there have that same feeling toward him. He's a murderer, and that's all you can say he is. He's a murderer. But the very fact that he's making the rounds on all these conservative media platforms is so revolting. It makes you want to vomit. Because first of all, he should be in prison. And it's simple to see that they're glorifying this guy. And then he himself is eating this up. He likes the fact that he's a media star. I cannot blame anybody more than Bruce Schroeder for what happened with that. It was clearly an effort by the judge to vindicate this person, put the thumb on the scale. And now what do we have? This vomit that's out there, this vomit sandwich, which ties in with what has happened over the last week. There are forces out there who are going to create this, getting gross here, but this pus of the Republican Party. And we're going to have to deal with this for the next 2 years as we slowly evolve into a fascist state, unless we do something about it. Right? All right. Let's look at the positive last night, because I think Hakeem Jeffries had something really important to say. And I think what's important for us to look at is, when I show you this, listen in the background to the Republicans, because after about the 5th or 6th letter, they start catching on that, he's using the alphabet to attack them. And everything he said was true. And they were upset. They were upset, which shows you, this is why they weren't going to make any deals with the Democrats, McCarthy. I mean, he could have. There were 212 Democratic votes. All he'd need would be 8 or 9 moderate Republicans, and they were there. But it didn't happen. Could have, but he doesn't have it in him. The idea of having some sort of decency was too far above him. So he went the other route. And they were willing to do this, all of them in the Republican side, because they hate us that much. I don't think, as much as we don't like them and we don't like what's happening, I don't think you and I, really know the depths at which they go to in terms of hating us. And in this sense, I think Obama and Biden have made great mistakes, somehow thinking that there'll be some type of turn, that the flower will somehow grow at some point between the cracks, and it doesn't. And we lost the Supreme Court because of it. They're not going to change. There was a tipping point. Now, we could argue where that tipping point was. Was it in 93, as I suggested, with the contract with America? Was it Trump 2015 putting his dirty fingers into the election? Or was it Reagan in 1980? But we're going to try to be honest about this. We're going to try to figure it out tonight. And I think this is important because I was listening to one of my favorites, Lenny Bruce, tonight. And it was actually this afternoon I was watching. And it was just great to to listen to his humor. But he was so far ahead of his time that a person like Lenny Bruce would have been perfect for this type of situation, what's going on with the Republican Party. Because he sensed the falseness in people. You know, he brought up this kind of interesting point. There was some religious leader, I don't know who it was. It really doesn't matter. In fact, I didn't really listen to this part tonight, but you'll remember this movie Psycho when Psycho came out. There's that scene from the shower, and was it not Tippi Hedren because she was in The Birds? Well, whatever, the murder scene, you know, and there was blood going down the drain, and the woman was wrapped in the shower curtains. It was just a brutal scene. And the protest over that film at that time had nothing to do with the violence. What do you think it was? It was the fact that it was a shower scene. These religious nuts who somehow found that offensive. But the blood was okay. The knife. Right. Hypocrisy. So anyway, let's take a look at Hakeem Jeffries, because I think, you know, knowing he knew what was going to happen. Eventually, McCarthy was going to become the leader. But he did get to say his few words. Kind of like the give me liberty or give me death speech. All right. So let's get this set up, shall we? Now I know I'm probably going to have some feedback, but we'll see. All right. Where's an echo?
But I also want to make clear that we will never compromise our principles. House Democrats will always put American values over autocracy, benevolence over bigotry, the Constitution over the cult, democracy over demagogues, economic opportunity over extremism, freedom over fascism, governing over gaslighting, hopefulness over hatred, inclusion over isolation, justice over judicial overreach, knowledge over kangaroo courts, liberty over limitation, maturity over Mar-a-Lago, normalcy over negativity, opportunity over obstruction, people over politics, quality of life issues over QAnon, reason over racism, substance over slander, triumph over tyranny, understanding over ugliness, voting rights over voter suppression, working families over the well-connected, xennial over xenophobia, yes we can over you can't do it, and zealous representation over zero-sum confrontation. We will always do the right thing by the American people.
Right. Gary, Nathan Hale was hung, unlike Jeff. Right, but believe me, between you and me, Gary, if they had gotten away with it on January 6th, aside from Pelosi, Jeffries would have been next. So, thankfully, the Capitol Police held out. So they were insulted when they heard that. Because this is, of course, McCarthy's night. I'm just glad Jeffries did it. In fact, he was quite kind. Compared to a lot of other Republicans who gave these completely partisan speeches. Just attacks on the Democratic Party. Stefanik. It's horrible. But it's the consternation, the actual consternation of these Republicans when somebody speaks the truth. And this is the trouble we have right now. There is something I do want to show you too. There are different moments that were interesting, but I want to show you another one. This is with our Matt Gaetz. And this is the moment that Gaetz changed his vote. Because he and McCarthy don't get along at all. And of course, we would actually like that because you want them to cannibalize each other. I can get everything together here. All right. Let's do it again. Now you might be hearing that going. There's nothing I can do about it right now. But let's take a peek at this. See if we can stomach it. This son of a bitch. Like the rest of them. Well, I think that was apropos because you saw these power plays last night because it was getting close. They had vote after vote after vote, and nothing was happening. And there was a great fear, of course, that McCarthy might do the right thing and try to get Democratic votes. Of course, he didn't do that. But then the consiglieres came up and started whispering in people's ears. You've got to do this and you've got to do that. Now, of course, Gaetz loved it. So did Boebert, because they knew the cameras were on them. Don't they love it? What's funny? Veg Gaetz has super creepy eyes. I think he is a super creepy person, of course. This affinity for hanging out with adolescent female youths. But let's not get into that. The idea was last night you saw the power play. You saw them at each other's throats. But think about it. All of that desperation, that intimidation that you saw last night, that I saw. You have to see where that's coming from. And I believe it's, as I said, it's the idea that there's so much hate for us that they were at the breaking point with each other. I mean, if McCarthy had said, okay, or if some Republicans said, we're going to vote with Democrats here, that would have ended it right there. Like if they said, if you don't vote for him now, we're going to vote for Jeffries. And they would have done something. But they didn't want to even do that because they don't want to see Jeffries win. So in other words, it's almost utilitarian. They're weighing out the pluses and the minuses. But the biggest minus is you and me. And this is where the danger is. Nancy Kaptur. Now, she's held political office in Ohio since, when I was in Ohio. 82, when she was young. When I was young. When I was 25, or something like that. This was a sad song to listen to, right? You start thinking about yourself, like, holy shit, is that me? But, seriously speaking, Nancy Kaptur, who's had more experience than anybody. I mean, she's been serving in Congress longer than anybody. I mean, that's, 40 years? 41 years? She expresses her concern that this will turn into a fascist state. Now, we've been talking about this. Veg and T-Bone, they've talked about the authoritarianism on their channels, and I certainly talk about it a lot. The idea that we're becoming a fascist state, or at least we have a fascist party. But the fact that Nancy Kaptur said it, because she, as a person serving in Congress has to have some type of optimism or some type of realism within him or her that you'll get through it, because we always have, and that eventually Congress will make the right decision. But the fear is there for her. And when she's afraid, a person who's with incredible experience, she's been on the team for a long time. She knows the field, you know what I mean? She knows every bit of the ice rink, where that puck bounces off. That's my metaphor for tonight. Yeah. No, there was a different song, Veg. It was Frank Sinatra. What is that song? It was a very good year. Is that the name of the song? It was a very good year. Or when I was 21. But if I want to be really honest, in the spirit of Lenny Bruce, one of my heroes, I can't say that those years were a very good year, any one of them. They were just years. One maybe a little bit less painful than the next. It's funny because I put a poll out. From time to time I put a poll on Divided We Stand. If you go to the community section, I had to ask the question, as I believe I put it, is your life as you expect it to be, when you were young, when you were a young kid? Did you expect life to be like this as it is today? And I do remember thinking about, what would I would be like when I'm 40? I almost saw myself as a different person. And in a certain sense, I was right. I look at that kid you see on the, one of my intro videos, myself when I was like 4. Is that me? I mean, I know it's me. It's that arm is still there. The nose is still there. But it never turned out to be anything like I expected. And every single person, I get the words wrong. I think Melody anyway, and I shouldn't. But everybody responded to that in the same fashion. 100%. their life was nothing like they expected. And that's what I ask you. If I mean, I don't know if you folks have already taken that poll, but I'd like to know, did any of you out there end up having a life more or less like you expected? I expected certain things to happen. Like I knew my mother and father were going to die. I had no idea it was going to happen the way it did. It was worse. But, apparently I'm not the only one who he sees myself as almost a completely different person than my expectations. And I'm not upset or anything like that. It's not as if I have regrets that I didn't become what I thought I was. It's just that, your mind plays games with you when you look at yourself as a person from the past, and then you know who you are now. I know this is getting philosophical, but it's kind of like the thought experiment, the ship of Theseus. Anybody who's familiar with it, when you have a ship and it starts losing some of its, wooden planks, and then they're replaced, and then, is it the same ship when it comes into port if you keep replacing the planks? And some people will say it is the same ship. Some people say it isn't. Most people say it isn't because it's actually different wood, right? But then we get into the idea of, well, what is the ship? Is it the captain? Is it the crew? And even if you could, take all those boards that you threw overboard and put new ones in, if you put the old ones together, would that be the ship? So the thought experiment is important because it really is a metaphor for us. How do we define ourselves over time? And although I'm technically the same body that you saw just 57 years later, 58 years later, whatever it is, as it is for you, but from that thought experiment, it makes me think, am I the same person? And if I want to be honest with myself, I'm not. I see that 4-year-old as the innocent me. And I have a certain reverence for that because I was new. I came in innocent, as you did. You have the same story as me. And the interesting thing is that many of you are around my age. We're generally from the same generation. But when we look at ourselves, we really are something different. And I think maybe that's the one thing I had right. The one thing I had right was when I was, 5 or 6 or 7, I knew that I was going to be older. And I'd have this fantasy, like, what will I look like? I'd be afraid to look at myself when I was older because I'd be a different person. And when I was thinking about those things, I do remember this. I remember to feel as though the older me would be different. And that part was right. That was right. I was different. And I'm not running away from my past. And there are, of course, many things that I regret from my past, that me from back then. But like the ship of Theseus, I think we have to think about our boards, our planks, and how we evolve. And I think that's a good thing, because when I look, hey T-Bone, Matt, when I look at what I saw this past week, you're looking at people, of course, they wouldn't like this. They did not evolve as themselves. They had that hate, that anger, that provincial thinking. That ugly side of us. Even if you could say, okay, maybe they were bad back then, but if you think if just with a bit of chance of meeting other people, you could evolve as a human being and see your faults. Just like we all look back at our ghosts. But they can't. They never got outside of themselves. They from that thought experiment, the ship of Theseus, they're the same. Yeah. On that subject, let's look and see if we have any commentary on that. All right, so Midas Lisa, holy shit, I don't think our humans were going to be dying off in my lifetime. And isn't that strange, Lisa? Because how perhaps you've all had this feeling that maybe everybody's not real in front of me. Maybe this is just a weird existence, and you're really the only person in the universe, but you're witnessing things. It's a different type of way of thinking. I know it's not true. That's thinking too egotistically to think something like that. But it is strange, Lisa, that here we are in this time period that this could be it. Like, everything would be gone. And if we are the only life, I doubt we're the only life in the universe, but as far as we can know, we are. But it's just big enough as it is, when you take the Earth, that everything could go right while we live. Even though people died in the past, like Caesar, and people who died at a young age, Joan of Arc, whomever you think about, they still had a planet afterwards, right? There was still this idea that when I die, it will continue. But now, Lisa, and this is to everybody, now the idea could be, after this is done, this is just going to be a burnt piece of coal. It's just, to me, I don't want to say fascinating, because it's frightening to think that from the moment of the Big Bang until the creation of the solar system to the 4.5 or 8 billion years that this planet's been around, for the time that there's been life on this planet, it could all end right while we live. And that makes you think sometimes. Yeah. I'm not a Ninja Turtle, so yeah. Well, when you're a little kid, sometimes you think, I used to like that show, that puppet animated show. I mean, what the hell was that? The Thunderbirds. I saw those little jet packs they'd be on. I want one of those. But I did get a cell phone. I guess that's close enough. Veg. I expected to make a lot of money. Laughing out loud. None of us are even the same person we were when we were young. No, and that's what I think. I do think, though, that some people, like these Republicans, who are racist and bigoted and whatever, they never grew up. They were like Peter Pans, but they were ugly, How do you become that? You would think with enough years you might kind of chill out, kind of like, a criminal. By the time he's 75, he slows down enough to know that he shouldn't be doing this stuff. Now, maybe that's because he can't run anymore. I don't know, but think that they change. Humans will surprise you in the most negative way, too. Karen, not even close. I thought everyone would be better off. Not homeless, not broke, not begging for medical insurance, etc., etc. Well, if you think about it, when you look at the early 60s, at least for this country, the one thing that Kennedy, the idea he tried to promote, we would be educated and we could all get ourselves out of poverty, all of us. There was this optimism, the optimism of youth. So you could have the idea that things were going to get better. I knew that technology might be better. I used to think there'd be a pill to make you live forever. But we're not too much different, right? We all wanted to be something magical when we were 4. You and I, we were innocent. We were too young to even have regrets, right? Regrets are a bitch. Why didn't I? Or why did I? You don't want to build too many of those up because it's tough to have them rattling around the brain. Those are the real ghosts. Yeah. Got a lot of hellos here. Mooney. I grew up in the chaotic, sugar-fueled 90s, so things turned out just about how I expected. And that's something else, too, ladies and gentlemen. A lot of us were from the baby boomer generation. Some not, but those of us who were in the baby boomer generation, I think what we faced was different than what Generation X, Generation Y, Generation Z. I mean, what comes our way sometimes, in terms of what we think is coming our way, is much different from generation to generation. Yeah, I like that one. By the way, I like your avatar here. It's from a famous movie, silent film. Wonderful. Veg. I wanted to be an astronaut or a race car driver or one of the monkeys. It's funny, the monkeys wanted to be the monkeys. That's what got them in trouble, right? They wanted to actually play as a group because they had enough ability to do it after a couple of years. And television didn't want it. And I understood it too. But that's what happened. Be an astronaut. Yeah, that reminds me, Veg. I'm not making any commentary on your comment other than do you remember a folk artist? His name was Harry Chapin. And I remember, what was the song that he wrote where it's called Taxi, right? And like the very last couple of lines, he wanted to fly, he said. And he said, we both got what we were asking for. She wanted to be an actress, and so he said she's acting because she's acting like she's happy with her husband. And he's flying high. Not as an astronaut, but he's flying high in his taxi, getting high every night. Just weird how my brain works. And you say, for someone else, it might not go there, but I always remember that. It was a very touching song. And for those who weren't from my generation, it won't mean anything. It's just what Lenny Bruce used to say. It's exposure. Even like, for example, when I use my humor in the high schools, my classes, there will be a few students who will laugh at what I say from time to time, or all the time, and then some don't laugh at all. And it's not that they don't think that I'm funny, those who don't laugh. It's just that they aren't, they didn't have the exposure to what I'm talking about. And therefore it makes no sense. And that's why you really, or we should, have a lot of empathy for people, what they go through. The idea of putting oneself in others' shoes, it's having that exposure to what others feel. I mean, I'm not saying live their lives the way they've lived it. I'm just saying, if you're exposed to it and you understand it. That's why I think people should travel. I mean, not necessarily, to take the skidoos and make a bunch of noise in the Caribbean, but see other planets. I mean, planets. Jesus Christ. See other countries, planets. Yeah, see other countries, because you just, people say, "Well, I love America. It's the greatest. I don't need to go anywhere else. I'll just travel around the country." Well, that's fine, but just don't say that everything's the best, because you're here. It makes no sense. Yeah. You would have made a good monkey, not a monkey, but one of the original monkeys. Bed you were hip. You still are. I'm not hip. I saw nuclear testing in the Pacific when I was young. I knew humans hate the environment. Yeah, well, I wouldn't want to see that. There's this one, I believe, one test by the Chinese, like in 49, their first test, and I think it was the Chinese test. And there was this dog chained out there, and it was barking. And why do you do that to an animal? Why do you do it to anybody? Don't explode the goddamn thing. But they had to do it. Videotape. They had to film the dog suffering, just like Laika. The Russian dog. There's a famous, somewhat famous poem that a young kid wrote because she was traumatized by the idea that the Soviet Union sent a dog up there because the dog died, and the dog was terrified on the way up. She had it right, a 12-year-old. And I get it. Well, you'd hope that, Gary, yeah. I'm just afraid if you have some thermonuclear event, then the whole planet will be sterilized. Let's hope it doesn't happen. I mean, look, we're all going to go. This whole discussion, on these other channels about we're fucked. Let me tell you, we've been fucked since the day we're born as individuals. You don't get out of it. This is not a new idea. When you go and when I go, the whole universe goes to us. So when we have our death, to us, it's everything goes. Yeah. Well, if I had grown up or if I had been a youngster saying I would like to live an interesting life, I think I would have achieved that. I didn't say that when I was a kid, though. Happiness was never a goal of mine. I'm not even sure I could define happiness. I like being relaxed, like right now. I'm not jumping for joy. I'm not real down. Not real thirsty. I could probably sit like this for 10,000 years if I didn't have to go to the bathroom or get bored, but I'm okay. Squirrel doesn't ask himself if he's happy, right? But happiness is something to want to achieve. I think I would say, Lisa, and that's fine. I think to achieve happiness is great. I would just want to get comfort. as long as I'm comfortable, because eventually there is the discomfort, the suffering. The suffering comes to us all. Maybe not now, but it will come for me and us, all of us. Technology, that's one thing I always thought about when I took popular culture in Bowling Green. And there's this myth there are these myths in popular culture. And one is the myth that technology is going to be our savior. Anybody who's ever watched The Twilight Zone knows it can kind of turn the other way too. I feel happy now, though, in general. That's good. That's good. It's always good. Better be happy than sad. But, they say sadness is the price we pay for love. Matt agrees about the Avatar, yeah. I really like that one scene. It was so cool. And at the time, you're talking, what, 1917, or I don't know when that movie came out, I forget. But it was obviously in the early ages of film. It was a masterpiece, being able to do that, given the situation. T-Bone. When I got my first Texas Instruments calculator, I remember those when they first came out and thought, wow, where can we go next? To this day, nothing is really adding up. It's funny you mention that. Now, this is really stupid, T. But I had that same feel with the calculators. And I remember I got the small calculator. And I loved it because it was just a tiny calculator. And it had this red LED, right? Well, that's why I liked it. I liked having a semi-dark room and those red lights. And it never really changed when I was a musician, when I gigged at night, like at bars, like, I don't know, Gary, we played like the Toadfish Bar, and it was everybody's drinking and smoking. But I got a calm feel when I would look at my amplifier with the red light on and the smoke running through it. There was just something calming to me. Veg, you might, associate with that kind of thing. Hey, Veg. So Veg knows what I'm talking about. Taxi by Harry Chapin. And by the way, he had such a tragic death, violent death. A truck hit him. Yeah, a truck hit him and killed him in New York. I think it was in Long Island. Yeah, it was a great song. And as I've told you, I've always concentrated on melody. Always. Just because the musician in me, melody, and even to some extent the harmony more than the actual vocals. But that's the one song I can say right off the bat. That's the one I listened to. And I would get lost in it, with what he was saying. And even the one guy who sings falsetto, it's not a female voice. It's a male falsetto voice in the chorus. Or the bridge. Yeah, the bridge. Taking tips and getting high. You know it, Veg, right? Yeah, so you have to be careful, because I don't know who's exposed to that or not. Because we do have younger people listening, Joey. Now, Joey's interesting, because Joey, you were born, I think, 1812? Just kidding. Now, Joey was born in 72. You don't mind me saying Joey. But Joey's 12 years younger than I am, and he was in a different generation where they were listening to like 90s music and all. But Joey is one thing I always remember him as when he was a student. He was always listening to 70s music, 70s and 80s, I don't know what it was. He was, an anachronism or something like that, because he listened to like the previous generation's music. It'd be like if I were listening to like 50s music, which is the only music I don't like, is the 50s. The doo-wop. If you like that kind of music, that's fine, but sorry you had to do that, but didn't like it. I would listen to my father's swing music. It was like cooler, much cooler than the 50s. I knew the 40s and the 30s were better. Thailand has legalized pot. The world is going topsy-turvy. Yeah, it's funny, how things have changed. And yet in Russia, you have like one seed. You're going to the gulag. And yet you can have a cart, 2 carts of vodka and get cooked off your ass in Moscow. But man, if you had anything like that, boom. Yeah. If only people would stop ingesting lead, save the brain cell. Well, who knows what leaded gas fumes did to us back in the day. I remember we did a science project. It was an environmental project. We were trying to see how much shit was coming out the back of the exhaust. And this was when I was in 7th grade. And we would take a piece of paper and put a bunch of Vaseline on it. And we'd go behind where, the exhaust was. And then you say, well, this one's giving out more exhaust. And it was kind of a simple, interesting thing. We thought it was cool because we were big into the environment back in 72, 73. Loved that. But, there was a lot of shit in there. One hip cat. I never saw myself as hip. I mentioned the consternation that the Republicans had at Hakeem Jeffries' commentary. The only thing that I had, I don't want to call it a hipness, but I appreciate it, by the way, Veg, I really do, is that when I would say things, there would be this, consternation out there. So whatever I was saying was doing something to some people. I remember, I think I was in 5th grade, and we had a substitute teacher, and she was having a tough time out in the lines. We had to line up, girls on one side, boys the other, and she was just giving us shit, and I wasn't doing anything wrong, it was just a couple kids who were acting like knuckleheads. And then she got one of the other teachers who actually lived down the street from me, and she was really brutal. So she made us keep quiet and stay out in the cold, and we just had to stand there. And the substitute, some old lady, I don't remember her name, and I'm not going to say it, not that it matters. She's probably been dead for 50 years. She was there smiling. She was so happy to see that we were cold. And I remember they asked us to write a story the next day. The teacher came back, and I wrote a story, and I kept talking about how the substitute was snickering at us, and I thought it was just a horrible display. I didn't say the word display, but I remember saying snickering. And I remember my teacher looking at it, and then she started calling all the other teachers in, and they were like this. And then I realized that, and this went on into high school to some degree, that when I said I was an atheist one time when I was like 16 or 15, I even said it again when I was teaching in Cherry Hill in one of the lounges. There was kids who wanted to have an atheist group, and no teacher would do it. So I said, I'll do it. And I remember one of the English teachers said, Brian, do you really believe there isn't a God? I mean, do you really? I said, yes, Joe, I really don't believe there's a God. So that kind of thing just kind of continued with me. Again, the consternation, I think, of what I would say. I'm not saying it was good or it was bad, hip or not, but it was always kind of generated. I always still carry that feel, folks, that I have to be careful what I say, because I'll say something where people go, I don't do it on purpose. It just comes out. I think that's where Dave and I were alike. I mean, Dave, less than I. Dave, it's his best quality and his worst quality. It's he had no filter. Gary, you know it. Dave will just come out and say something, and it's just, there's no filter, and sometimes it gets you, and sometimes it doesn't. But you have to be yourself, and that's what Dave's greatness is. He's himself. It just the minute he thinks it, boom, it comes out. Yeah, they have the murder thing. Yeah, you see, this is the thing too, T. As you know, a lot of people are falling out of hotel windows out of nowhere. Just for some reason, they're deciding they've had it with life. Well, we know what's really going on. And this is why 500,000 young males have left the country. And it was probably the smartest thing. It was better than going out in the streets and protesting. Just leave. There won't be anybody left to fight the goddamn war. Now they got to get other people from other countries involved. And Putin made a mistake, because it's only now that he's starting to put on these controls. He's now putting out these, issues with the digital issues. Don't you dare leave, or we will contact you, and boom, you can't. They waited too long, and 500,000 got out. But yeah, a lot of people, enemies get liquidated. Journalists. And look with Navalny. Now he's liquidated. He's suffering every day. Happiness, Saturday Night's here. Yeah. I appreciate that, really. I mean, if this makes you happy, I really appreciate it. And I appreciate it because I am commiserating with you, and I am generally more negative than anything else. So, for somebody to be able to say that, given what I say, I wouldn't want to be a person with depression around me, because make you feel worse. And I don't try to. We just felt the bad thing was going to happen, because it usually did. If not to me, to somebody else. No, I would say, Trev, for me, yeah, that's what you want. But I think I'm not at peace with the universe. I'm very much against the universe. I don't like it, the way it's set up. But it's really not set up as, somebody tinkering and making it set up. You'd have to be diabolical to set it up the way it is. But just that search for comfort, that's about all we can expect. Comfort. And comfort for those who we love. Because sooner or later it gets you. California is a prime example of climate change. Never even thought this stuff could happen when I was a kid here in California. That's what most people say, isn't it, Karen? Never thought it could happen to me. Till it does. I'll be a 57 model next month, yeah. I was reading something interesting that, the best way to keep yourself young is get sleep and keep hydrated with water, for your biological age too. If you got to go through this shit, you might as well try to be healthy, right? Yeah, black lights were the best, weren't they, Karen? You had the ultraviolet posters and all that. Oh, I still love this. In fact, when I see cars with the ultraviolet light around their lights or their license plates, it's very pleasing to me. It's very calming. I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. I've almost thought like if it was just ultraviolet light we had, it would be kind of a cool existence. Imagine living in like on a planet that had like a 60s feel, in your basement there, your paneled basement with the black lights and the posters. Yeah, like the way I see it, man, is that was great. That was very pleasing. Yeah, was it the neon I like too? That's very pleasing. I guess the argon is kind of like neon but different colors. I like that. That's very pleasing. Certain lights are just very pleasing. Trip to the Moon. I guess that was the movie. Wow, 1902. Thanks, Mooney. I mean, I've seen it. 1902. God damn. Isn't that something? I mean, really, if you think 1902 and they're able to do that kind of thing, that was amazing. Brilliant. Yeah. My mother bought a calculator for my dad in 75. It was as big as a laptop. I've been drawing with oil and pencil and wood, and I'm done. I wish I could post them here. Abstract. See you, Lisa. We do start with parents' music. One favorite album as a little kid was Johnny Horton, then Neil Young, Led Zeppelin, Frank Zappa. I was born in 72. You're just like Joey. I'm trying to think of like my favorite Zappa song. Like everybody likes Montana, It's the one that I really like is, what is it? Nanook of the North, whatever. It's the one where, some guy takes his lead boot and kicks his favorite baby seal, and then he gets mad and he gets some, some frozen yellow snow and blinds the guy. I love that song. I forget the name of it though. I don't know why I can't remember it. Maybe I'm losing my memory. That is such a great song. If anybody out there knows what song I'm talking about, tell me. One's worm is over a half and all the others kind of influence. Yeah, when I was subbing years ago. That's like an age ago too, Take care, have to run. Thank you. I'll see you, Karen. Geddy Lee doesn't believe in God. His parents are. Yeah, I've seen those interviews too with Geddy Lee. I think, that discussion of, I think we had it here. Does that invade the children? That some part of their DNA, some part of the psychology of the parents. Does it get into the kids? My father used to have a card group, every other week or whatever. They'd meet, and one of the guys had survived the camps, and they usually just talked about sports and politics or something like that. But one night they got into a philosophical discussion, and they were talking about God or something, and somebody said, one of his friends says, I don't believe in God. Now, my father didn't ask him the question. It was just somebody else who was talking about it. He said, really, you don't believe in God? And he pulled up his shirt sleeve and he showed the numbers. And my father said the whole card table got quiet. Never discussed it again, out of respect for him. That was his answer. And Scaly. Now, that may not be all Geddy Lee's thinking, but he knows what happened. Trev B, I had a copy of the Mother's Absolutely Free album when I was 11. My parents were horrified, yeah. Don't prosper too much. You said that right, Matt. You prosper too much, then what happens to the planet? Would Dave have been a good stand-up comic? That's a great question, Gary. Well, first of all, in one sense, yes, because Dave can be funny. Dave likes speaking to people. He has no fear speaking in front of crowds. But as comedians, this is where Dave isn't like a Lenny. You know, you would think he could be like a Lenny Bruce. Now, Lenny Bruce said something to the effect that, I forget what he said, but he said most of what he does or did during a show was planned, but he always left around 8 to 10% of the jokes to be spontaneous. And I was just riffing off of what's going on, somebody yelling in the audience or whatever, because you got to have some of that. You know, otherwise it was planned. Right? Now for Dave doesn't like the plan part, right? So if you're going to riff, you got to be able to riff all the way through, right? And I think that would be difficult for him. Again, there would be no problem for Dave speaking in front of people and even perhaps getting a laugh. But you have to be careful, as Lenny Bruce had said. He said that, you know, he knows when he's doing well, but you got to, somebody told him, you know, if you're going to be here, you got to make people laugh about every 15 to 20 seconds. And when you don't get that laughter more than a few times, you're going to consider it a bad night. So my opinion is that Dave probably wouldn't have been a good stand-up comic because he is so spontaneous, and the no filter part, I guess, is okay. But to be spontaneous the entire time and be on, because I can't see Dave memorizing. You remember, if you've played with Dave, I mean, that was the one thing we had in common. We didn't memorize a note. I didn't know what I was going to play from 1 minute to the next. It was just, at that moment, I'm thinking, okay, I'm playing over an A minor 7th. Okay, what am I going to do this time? Am I going to outline the chord with, you know, A, C, E, G? Or am I going to start doing some chromatic thing? That happens at that moment. I don't like go through the song and say, well, now I think I'm going to use a C major 7th arpeggio over the A minor 7th or something. It can't be planned. But when you're doing comedy, I think you have to, like, I think Bruce was right. You had to have some structure to what you're doing. Yeah. So that would be my answer with Dave. And he probably wouldn't choose to be a comic anyway, to be honest with you. Well, I think, I'll speak for myself, Mooney, is that there's a certain sense of negativity, is that there's a certain sense of honesty within it. Unless you're just paranoid, or you're, just because you've had so many things happen in your life that you're negative. But like people who curse, I mean, I'm not talking about like somebody who's rude, a kid who's rude and says F this and F that, but people who curse from time to time, they're more honest. These people who filter themselves too much, there's something bullshit about them. Curmudgeon. Yeah, my wife is generally an agnostic, and I guess that's technically the way we should approach something. Is we can't know for sure that there isn't, right? bottom line is, even if you're agnostic, you don't believe. So you might as well say you're an atheist, because it's not believing until you get to that point where you can believe. That's the diff. I have to get to that point. Even if I were an agnostic, again, I'd have to believe something to believe it. Amazing quotes. Was that the song? Because I remember it was like called The Nook or something like that. But anyway, it was just great. I like animals too. I like the idea of him, in a frozen poop scoop cone or something like that. The fact that he's going to get him back because it was his favorite seal. My name is Bertram. I'm a redneck. Too funny, that song. Just go away. OG. Weird Al movie. Thanks, Gary. Comedy should win Academy Awards too, and that movie should. Comedy is that. We did a lot of research on foundations of libertarianism and Ayn Rand and Laura Ingalls. Little House on the Prairie writer was a big part of it. I am definitely not an Ayn Rand fan. Or different. Lenny was Lenny, right? Dave would be good at comeback, building jokes out of that. Yeah, Dave would. Actually, now that I think of it, Gary, I think that's why we work together well, because I'm like straight guy and he's the, I'm like Costello and he's Abbott, when a lot of times I'm kind of like the opposite. But he needs somebody like me, and it's harder to be the straight guy too, as you know, because you have to help out the Abbotts, Yeah. Lucas, though, who was the... Anyway, if you're the straight guy, I think it was in Taxi, Rieger was the guy who was the straight guy. You've got to know how to work things out. I mean, you would know, Gary, because you were an actor. You know the sitcoms and all that kind of stuff. Straight guy's a hard role to play. You got to make the other guy look good. Your timing's got to be impeccable to help them. Libertarian, opposing views. Interesting. It's funny too. I liked Rush when I was 16. I kind of lost interest in Rush, but as I've said, and this is going to be weird for many of you up in Canada, that when I think of Rush, I think of Mahogany Rush, because I really enjoyed Mahogany Rush. I still listen to it. I mean, I'm not saying it's like really polished, like you would get a Yes song or a Genesis song, but this, it's just it's significant in its own way. There's, Frank Marini would always swing, and I like that. Like he was interesting, and there was more heart in his music for me to listen to. But they're both great groups. But Mahogany Rush, very underrated group. I think it's too tough too when you're Canada, because you got to kind of come down here to make it. Like Gino Vanelli had to do that, and he did it, and he made it. Joni Mitchell, Neil Young, other bands had to fight for it. Like they're big up Canada, but not big here. But Dave would be good at feeding off of the audience, comebacks, building material out of that, plus his own practice material. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. You might get too pissed at the audience, right? Mort Sahl was great too. Oh shit, yeah. Lenny is just tremendous. Let me show you this clip. I've waited a while to show you this. I wanted to go to your commentary, and this is not going to be a long show. God, it's 10:21. I thought it was 10 o'clock. I want to show you Asshole again, okay? And believe me, there's so many in the Republican Party. Now you're going to get the echo. Oh, sorry about that. I can take it off for a second. I'm going to show you Kyle, who is Bruce Schrader's good friend. Whether he would deny it or not, he is. So here we go.
Started using my voice for good, and like
20-year-old life, if you can.
well, I don't think that could be normal, but I've accepted this media world, and I've accepted the realm of being this public figure. So I've started using my voice for good, and like advocating for the Second Amendment and pushing issues I believe. Like I'm extremely pro-life and pro-2A, so that's what I've been trying to push on my social media.
20-year-old life, if you can.
Well, I don't think that could be normal, but I've accepted this media world, and I've accepted the realm of being this public.
What an incredibly ignorant asshole. Murderer. Talking about caring about life and the Second Amendment so he can shoot him up again, right? If it wasn't for the Second Amendment, he wouldn't have been able to pull his crazy shit. Of course, with Bruce Schrader. Wow. Well, that's pretty cool. I saw Mahogany Rush in like 90, I want to say 92 or 3. Maybe latest 94. Couldn't have been after 94 because my friend died at the concert. I saw him in a bar, and there were probably about 100 people there. So loud. I think my ears are still affected from that night because I was right near the speaker. But I saw him in a bar in Philly, and he was great. But I couldn't enjoy it completely because, again, it was so loud. I had to move to the back of the venue. It wasn't a big venue. It was loud no matter where you went, but it was just the idea. I'm right up, against where Frank was playing, because I sat on a couch in front of Alan Holdsworth. I've seen Holdsworth so many times, but I saw him at this great venue in Philadelphia, and it was a special night. I think I paid like $150 each for the tickets. I got dinner, and there was a couch right there, and he was right in front of the stage. So seeing Mahogany Rush was no different. I said, wow, I'm right. Frank Marino is like 3 feet from me. I can see everything that he's doing, checking out his riffs and his chords, and anything that I found interesting with his equipment. But it was just too loud. It was just, it was way too loud. Frank played really loudly, at least that night. But he was great, there was no doubt about it. I think, looking back, I enjoyed Robin Trower probably the most of the rockers as far as concerts at a bar. I saw him when he was older. It was great. Damn, Brian, Mahogany Rush, haven't heard that group's music in 79. That's usually where his best stuff is from, 79 and before. If you go 80 and out, I can't really listen to it because Frank Marino was kind of trying to keep up with what was going on because he was in trouble. I mean, he never made a lot of money, and his big thing was, doing, he played in Monterey, I think, the California Jam in front of 300 grand people. He played the Texas Jam when it was like 110 degrees and he's wearing leather, sweating to death. He was playing with what's his ass, Ted Nugent. And he apparently didn't get along with like Aerosmith and Ted Nugent because he would like open up for them, but there was I forget it was the discussion of how things go. And Frank, I think is he's religious, but I think he's a liberal. He wasn't like them. Not that I'm saying Aerosmith wasn't liberal, but they didn't get along with each other. But anyway, there were issues like Aerosmith always wanted a certain thing happening. I saw Frank Marino open up for Aerosmith at the Philadelphia Spectrum. He only played for like 45 minutes, but most of the good stuff came early. You know, Frank Marino was making albums when he was 17, and the guitar playing was good then. He'd only been playing for 3 years, but he was good. And like I said, there's always a swing to his music. He always had little jazz lines in his bluesy playing. You know, there was always a swing. And there's a good version. The guy who, you know, did covers of Hendrix, his name was Randy Hansen. He was on an album called Secondhand Smoke, where like all these guys would play cover tunes of some of the great guitar songs. And Randy Hansen did a cover of Frank Marino's song The Answer. It's really good. It's not as good as Texas Jam. Yeah, it's not as good as Frank Marino's version, in my opinion. In fact, the vocals, I think he screws up the words on them too. But Frank Marino took a lot on his hands. You know, he really tried to make it, and like I say, he played in front of big venues. But the '80s came along and the music changed because he had started out as a psychedelic band, and Mahogany Rush couldn't keep up with that sound because the '80s rock was different. He was a great player, but that's not they were listening. Then he got real technical. Not that he wasn't technical, he just didn't phrase the way that the 80s players like the Yngwie Malmsteens were, and you know, whatever. So, you know, Frank Marino's big days were, you know, in the middle to late 70s. And, you know, like most musicians, you had to win in the United States. You know, Holsworth had to come here to survive. And Marino was, you know, he would get there, you know, some of his music would be played, but not much. And Canada wasn't big enough. Like in Montreal, he could sell out. And even in Montreal, in Canada, it was hard for his songs to get on. I think he said like a few of them would, like Dragonfly would make it. But he never became a wealthy guy. He was true to the business, and he understood the changes that were made in music in the 80s. And then, you know, you had a tour. And by the way, 3 years ago, Frank Marino he's a serious like disease now that he can't, his arm's like frozen. I forget what it's called, but he can't play anymore. He retired 2 or 3 years ago. You can check it out on the internet. I can't remember what exactly happened, but he doesn't play anymore. He can't play. The last concert he had was in, I think, Cleveland at the Agora. And it's a DVD set. You can check it out online, or you can buy it online, whatever. But he never made it big. I think one of his daughters is a classical opera singer. But I don't even think Frank Marino graduated high school. But he was a very, very intelligent guy. He knew what he wanted to do with his life. Very religious. He said, in fact, I think he said something to the effect that, you know, if you are a believer, please pray for me. He was hoping that he'd get some type of relief from what's happened to him. But yeah, Texas Jam. But that was a bad night for him, because I think what happened with Frank Marino with the Texas Jam, I think the story was like he didn't come on till late, really late. And even though there were 100,000 people there or whatever it was, about 40,000 left because everybody was just bombed out from the heat. You know, and Ted Nugent played forever. And then Marino had that, you know, he would always wear the leather pants and the leather jacket, shirt, whatever you want to call it. And he was just, they say he was pouring in sweat. You know? Yeah, I remember the rock group Angel. In fact, I was at a bar because, you know, one of my friends kind of made it. He played for Heaven's Edge, Reggie Wu. They actually played at a bar. I believe it was Angel. Played at a bar. We went to see my friend Reggie. Now, I wasn't good friends, but I was friends enough with him. He lived a couple blocks down. He made it pretty big. He played for Heaven's Edge. I want to say, I think I saw Angel at a bar. Yeah. If that was them, I think I saw them. I didn't like it because I wasn't into that kind of thing, you know. I mean, I was into definite middle 70s rock. Nothing against the music. In fact, Reggie's music, I mean, I loved Reggie's playing, but I couldn't get into the heavy metal thing. You know, I was already moving into that 80s sound, which, aside from the Police, I couldn't relate to. So here, that's the old musician in me. I'm going into musical topics, you know. That's that, you know, we were talking about Theseus as, you know, the ship. That's my part of the boards that were from the past. You know, they were thrown away. You know, but they're still somewhere in the ocean out there, right? I mean, they're still out there, just like all of you. You know, you've got pieces of those wooden planks somewhere thrown out. I mean, you're not the same. Those days are over, but that's the way it's supposed to be. New days, new friends. And right now, you guys are it. And I appreciate it. I think that's a good place to end it, right? Well, it's good to see everybody. And I'd like to, maybe next week, if you guys are free, T-Bone and Veg, yeah, you're welcome to come on. We'll have this good discussion, because I really enjoyed our show a couple weeks ago. Really, really interesting. You know, so, and Veg, when are you getting your camera? When's that coming up? Did you get it yet? That will be interesting too. I told you I'm happy for you. Really happy for you. So anyway, I want to thank everybody tonight. And yeah, I mean, that's about enough. Thank you, everybody, and hopefully we'll all be comfortable this week, or as much as we can be. Cool. So we'll throw some more planks out and patch it up, right? We want Dave back, but cool. So you guys are going to be those boards that were the new ones we're going to put in there, and that's going to hold the ship together. Great to see you, Mooney. Great discussion. Excellent. Appreciate everybody. I mean that. These are good times for an hour and a half or whatever it is. Yeah. All right. I will send you guys a link. And if any of you other folks ever feel like coming on, I can have up to 5 guests. I got it, but I can't use the 4K till I get new software. So it's a paperweight right now, right? That's funny that you say that. I gotta get the new software. I'm laughing with you, Veg, really, but that's just the way life is. Like you get exactly what you want. Oh, but it doesn't work with this thing. I gotta get a new goddamn thing. Which is, by the way, what Dave used to do with his instruments. You know, it's just one thing led to the next. It's great. Cheer on you. Thank you, Matt. Good talking with you. Appreciate it. Life is short, and you guys, we're all part of it, each other. Some weird music, but it's copyright free. This is called Playground Cop, a dark lullaby.